Hello and welcome everyone to the latest edition of our virtual event series, Smart Energy Summit. Today we're going to be talking about distributed energy and the new value shifting from a decentralized grid. I'm excited about our lineup today. We're going to open with some slides and research that I'm sharing today, and then we're going to be joined by a panel of industry players from a couple of different spaces in distributed energy. So they'll be bringing their perspectives from OEM to installer to trainer to share with you, the audience, how changes are occurring in that space and looking forward to growth. Next, we'll have a fireside chat with a leader at Schneider Electric, Ansul. And finally, we'll have another panel regarding system integration and platforms that has another group of interesting industry players in it. And then we'll wrap it up. So first, let me start by thanking our sponsors, Schneider Electric, SmartThings, Rapid Response Monitoring, Zen Ecosystems, and Particle. And also give a quick shout out to our supporters, including CEDIA, Z-Wave Alliance, IOXT, Resident Tech Today. These people all help us get the word out, build the discourse around these important topics, and generally support us by also providing some of their time to work in these events as well. So 2022 has been a good year, but we're wrapping it up and looking forward to 2023. We have 3 more virtual events next year and 1 in-person event. We're going back to Austin. It's been a couple years since we've been able to go back to where we were kind of originally founded. So I'm excited to do that in Austin in mid-February. And then we'll be having more of these virtual events that you guys can look forward to, covering solar, home energy management, and another look at distributed energy later in the year. Oh, also as a reminder, if you have been involved in the Smart Energy Summit this year, you can still find some of the documentation and recordings of some of those presentations in SwapCard. If you kind of navigate around, you can pull some of the older content. I'm Chris White. I'm a research director here at Parks. I cover the smart energy silo, and also I'm a co-host on the Connected Consumer podcast. And I'm going to start today by sharing some research information. So we host these great events, and that's something we're very proud of and enjoy greatly. But at our heart and at the core, we're a research organization. So please don't forget that we have also reports available for you guys to buy and consume. We're putting out content all the time on our socials and on our website. And I'm going to be drawing from some of those resources today, including a report that we published earlier at the kind of in Q1 of the year called Smart Energy at Home. And it included research from Q4 2021. So we're going to be looking at kind of where consumer perspectives were as a sort of moment in time in advance of what became a really interesting year in the energy space. So many wild things happened this year, including war in Ukraine and the subsequent energy crisis related to that, gas prices going through the roof, macroeconomic conditions, including inflation, continuation of supply chain problems. So it's been a really interesting year. And we're going to be revisiting all those same topics plus more at the end of the year. So keep an eye out for more information about a report that we'll be putting out that is kind of going to be a refresh, state of the smart home with regards to energy in Q1 next year. But for now, I'm going to be using our energy research from earlier before, as I mentioned, and we're going to talk about consumer perspectives on energy use and opportunities based on those perspectives in home solar, storage, and EVs. Because while EVs right now are just going to be consumers of energy, they are going to be big drivers because they're such huge consumers of energy of solar and battery solutions. And then down the road, when we get bidirectional charging kind of more normalized and sorted out and sort of more accessible to the mass market, they'll be part of the distributed energy world. And I also wanted to kind of highlight a couple of interesting events that occurred this year that impact the distributed energy world. And then I'll be kind of bringing some questions to the panel about those topics as well. So let's start kind of level set a little bit by talking about what distributed energy means. Distributed energy means that the consumers are participating in the energy landscape as more than just consumers. They're potentially creating their own energy and pushing it back onto the grid, or they might even just be completely islanded, working in their own energy and not participating with the grid at all. So we need to keep that in mind, that consumers are kind of choosing based on what kind of solutions that they buy and how they set up their homes, where they're falling on this continuum. So all of these behaviors that people do to reduce or even generate more energy of their own is coming from kind of an internal attitude around energy consumption. And what we find in our research is that almost half say that they are currently actively working to reduce energy consumption at home. And another sixth, let's say, are interested in also reducing energy consumption, but still need some help. The others don't necessarily see the benefit today, or they didn't at the end of last year. I'm really interested to see how these groups on the left here are feeling after a year when energy prices were so high and gas prices were so high. Maybe they're going to start considering those costs and having a little more worry about them now. However, even with all these energy events happening, the familiarity with the devices that could potentially help is still low. So we see that not even half of people feel like they're highly familiar with generator options that they have in the space. And generators have, of course, been around for a long, long time. Other newer solutions, such as plug-in electric vehicles, solar solutions, and home batteries, the familiarity is much lower. Meanwhile, again, Q4 2021, before costs really got really high, more than half said that they already thought that electricity costs were high, so this is only going to go up, I'm expecting. And meanwhile, purchase intention for electric vehicles particularly leapt up. And that was before all of the marketing that existing automakers have been doing over the past, I guess, 12 months, really kind of kicked off at the Super Bowl last year with the Ford F-150 Lightning commercial. But now it's ubiquitous. All the major OEMs are advertising their electric vehicles, even though a lot of them aren't even available yet to the public or are in such short supply that you couldn't get one even if you wanted. So we're going to hopefully see that turn around, and then EVs are likely to take off. Meanwhile, the growth of solar power also took a little leap. We saw more interest in buying solar, again, before energy situation even made it more common. Now, talking to people in the industry that are involved in solar installation and home energy in general are saying that more and more consumers are adding batteries to their solar solutions. And we see big players like Tesla, Sonnen, Generac, and Schneider all have their own storage and generation solutions and that are competing with each other or working closely with each other as partners when they are looking to source some of the devices and not others. We also see Fortress as a big player in the battery space as well. Now, big exciting news for the energy space earlier this year came with the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, followed by the Inflation Reduction Act. These both represent huge influx of money and a strong tailwind for the home energy space in general, and particular for distributed energy. We saw, if we're counting EVs in the mix here a little bit, we saw a huge $7.5 billion tranche of money that's going to public charging infrastructure that's going to make EVs much more practical and sort of driving along the highway. And also, we saw the extension of existing incentives around home solar and new incentives for using more energy efficient appliances and bringing on board more energy efficient products into the home, such as electric heat pumps and home energy monitoring solutions. So all of that money and all that push coming federal government is sure to help. Also, we started to see in the public sphere, more and more distributed energy news in the mainstream media and touching our communities. So one example that I really like is the use case of using school buses as backup power. These are big devices. If electrified buses can be used to power municipal buildings and provide energy to the local grid, that's a great resource for when they're not being in use, which is all during the school day when the kids are in school, and then of course on the weekends as well. One of our kind of frequent contributors, AutoGrid, was partnered with Zoom in putting together a large-scale project on that in California. And there's also an interesting startup called SignUp that is working with existing buses to kind of retrofit and convert electric buses into backup batteries. Also, something that's kind of personal, close to home for me, like literally close to home. I lived in New Orleans for a few years and worked in the nonprofit space over there. So I'm really excited to see some distributed energy action occurring in some groups even that I'm familiar with. So after the hurricane in 2021, Hurricane Ida, the people of New Orleans and the government in New Orleans saw that homes that were equipped with solar and battery were able to kind of handle the blackouts that followed the hurricane a little easier. And so they understood that they needed to invest in better infrastructure to provide services for people during disasters. So 127 Energy, Solar Alternatives, and some others, including SPAN, got together and put some funding into it, along with municipal funding. And they partnered up with some local nonprofits, including Together New Orleans, Feed the Second Line, and some local church leaders to build out a scheme where there would be more resilient electrified stations with solar and storage options to act as, they're calling little lighthouses here, but it's essentially like disaster sites where people who are, don't have the money for a hotel or the ability, but either from mobility problems of their own or because they don't have cars, things like that, we're not able to evacuate or are stranded for some other way. They can walk less than 15 minutes to one of these quote unquote community lighthouses and have, warmth and heat and electricity, and also a sense of community and access to volunteers that can help them with medical conditions and things like that. So it's potentially very helpful. And the picture on the right here is of a setup that's on a Caribbean restaurant that's just 4 blocks from the house I lived in when I was living in New Orleans. So it's wild for me to see the little local Caribbean joint in the news. But here it is. It's got a nice SPAN panel and some Tesla gear on there as well. And I suppose that would have been my little area to go and get some refuge. So that's a very kind of inspiring story for me. Also, I should also mention, getting back to the business side of things, that there is a lot of opportunity here because the consumers don't necessarily have a particular favorite channel that they're looking at to provide solar PV and storage solutions. So while we're seeing all these stories in the news that are kind of normalizing this stuff as incentives are pushing more solar onto people's roofs and people are getting ready to go out shopping, they're not necessarily going to one place. There's all sorts of opportunities for players in the space to kind of guide this new interest. And so I'm including here some examples I think are particularly interesting. GF Energy, when we have one of our panelists who we're going to hear from in a minute, is allowing roofers to act as kind of solar installers and providers. And also ADT, a longtime home security giant, acquired SunPro and are bundling in those services. And that gives the opportunity for security providers in a way to act as a gateway to a solar solution in the home. So those are just a couple examples of the opportunities in space, but there are certainly more. Also, in terms of opportunity, there is a big player that is vacating at least part of the space. Tesla had previously been working on installing home solar solutions that included solar roof and also panels, but they've decided to move away from that. I imagine that they're going to stay in the battery business for a while, but at the very least, they're moving away from the rooftop solutions. So July, they started backing off, and then October, they fully canceled projects. So that'll leave a little gap in the market that is another area for people to move into. So overall, I just want to call out what I kind of covered here today. We know that consumers want to save energy and money. We also know that they're looking for ways to save that energy and don't necessarily know how. We see that there is an appetite for renewables and storage for resilience. And we also know that there's opportunities in this growing space that includes strong tailwinds from the government and also, a lot of movement in terms of companies joining together, partnering, acquiring each other, and so forth, that a smart, agile business can kind of take advantage of. So I want to bring some of those smart business people in here today. So I have a great lineup, as I mentioned before, including our GF Energy person and then some other interesting brands we're going to hear from. So let's see, you want to start first with Magnus. He's joining us. He's the Senior Director of Technical Marketing from SolarEdge. They have a really interesting solution, and I'm excited to have Magnus on board here to talk to us a little bit about what SolarEdge is doing.
Great. Thanks very much, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here. Just a quick thing about who SolarEdge is. We are a leading provider of inverters and storage equipment in the PV space. The company has been in business since about 2006, grown quite large in that time. At this point, we have about 2.6 million systems installed on a global basis in 133 different companies or countries. But today, really, we wanted to talk a bit more about how those resources can be leveraged by utilities and to support basically societal goals overall. We've obviously been very focused on the left-hand side of this chart, where we are making sure that people can generate their own energy and store it. However, where we are increasingly putting emphasis is supporting programs that are broadly called virtual power plants. This is something that we're seeing growing on a global basis. The ability for the utilities with the consumer permission to reach in and actually tap into those resources in order to support the grid overall. So we're looking forward to speaking about that in some detail today. And as I said, Chris, real pleasure to be here.
Great. Thanks again, Magnus. All right, next we're going to go to Keely from the Vice President of Marketing and Public Policy at GAF Energy. Thank you so much, Keely, for being here. I've talked to a whole bunch of your colleagues at conferences before, but I'm excited to finally have a GAF Energy person on the panel here. So excited to hear from you.
Wonderful, Chris. Thank you so much, and thanks for the note earlier about our go-to-market plans and that we sell through roofers. So GAF Energy is part of Standard Industries company. Standard is the largest roofing and waterproofing company in the world, and focused on modern conscious industrialism. GAF Energy is also sister company to GAF, North America's largest roofing and waterproofing manufacturer. So GAF Energy essentially spun out of GAF about 4 years ago. We were founded in 2019 with a vision of energy from every roof. Now, our real goal, translating that vision into reality, is getting roofers, as Chris mentioned, to sell and install solar roofs as part of their normal course of business. And we had an original product called Decotech that was roof integrated. It was a building integrated photovoltaic product. It was a decent product, but it didn't quite have the scale potential. And so over the past 4 years, we've been working hard to iterate on product and also services. And in so doing, we created the Timberline Solar Roof. We announced the Timberline Solar Energy Shingle earlier this year at the Consumer Electronics Show. And the Timberline Solar Energy Shingle is the world's first nailable solar shingle. So this product installs just like a regular roofing shingle, just with a nail gun, and generates clean energy while also protecting the home like America's #1 selling roof. So as you see in this image here, it's low profile. It's coplanar with the asphalt roofing shingles and installs easily. And so roofing contractors across the United States have started adopting this product. We've been really pleased with the success we've had so far, and we continue to look to new states. We're operating in about 12 markets now, and expanding, it feels like, every single month. We've seen really rapid growth and great reviews, great adoption, and an ongoing interest in this product. It powers the home just like rack-mounted solar panels while protecting from roof damage in the installation. And it really is just a roof with solar added. So excited to talk more about distributed energy resources in general, and more about GAF Energy during the panel. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Keely, for sharing information about GAF Energy and the products there. Brett, thank you also for being here from Green Home Institute. I'm excited to have you kind of bring in a different perspective, more of a workforce perspective here as you guys do training. So can you tell us a little bit about what Green Home Institute does?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. The Green Home Institute is a nonprofit with a mission to empower people to make healthier and more sustainable choices in the renovation and construction of the places we live. We do that in 3 primary ways. The first being education. So we have a weekly Wednesday webinar continuing education series that we do that's globally attended. We've been doing that since 2013 on all sorts of green building topics, including solar and batteries and distributed energy resources. And then also we have professional trainings. We do a local West Michigan Green Building and Beer series. We run the annual residential net zero energy conference every year as well. And then from a certification standpoint, we help oversee green building certification programs to help ensure that the 5 pillars of green: energy, health, materials, water, and place are met for single family, multifamily, mixed use projects. To some extent, globally, we have projects that we oversee from a consulting standpoint. And then we also receive grant dollars, at least within West Michigan, to deliver these education and certification services to those experiencing poverty and supportive housing agencies who are helping assist people in need. And so, from this perspective, obviously we focus a lot on energy efficiency for homes and especially health for homes, but ensuring that everybody gets access to solar and batteries, especially as time of use programs are coming out, and in some cases we're being pushed into. We help people understand those programs, how they fit in with the green building certification programs and benefit them, and how we can holistically look at a house, in all regards, and then also ensure that we, incorporate these distributed energy resources into them, and people get access to them who are, sometimes often left out.
All right, great. Thanks, Brett, for telling us all that. Also, I'm happy that you get to have beer sometimes when you work. That's awesome. Laurent, thank you for being here. He's the head of utilities and European developments for Decibel. They have a really interesting solution he's going to tell you about next. Hi, Laurent. Thanks for being here.
Yes, good afternoon. So I'm based in Paris, actually. So very happy to be here today. So we are preparing the launch of a revolutionary product for home, which is a home energy station, which you can see here on that slide, which really simplify the life of consumers in integrating storage, bidirectional car charging, as well as photovoltaics, all through a single box. And we are going to bring together an app platform, which will allow to orchestrate transaction and flexibility with the with utility and the grid overall. So we are planning to launch our products in California, New York, Texas, UK, and France over the next year. Very happy to be here and exchange drivers around home energy management.
All right. Thanks, Laurent, for telling us about that. Also, we have Brad Stutzman. He's the founder and chief executive officer of O3 Energy, works in the solar space. Hi, Brad. Thanks for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about O3?
Yeah, O3 Energy, we're a renewable energy developer and EPC, mainly focused on distributed generation across the U.S., Pacific Islands, and Mexico. We do both behind the meter and in front of the meter projects, typically rooftop solar, parking canopies, ground mount, also providing energy storage for our customers and EV charging when needing it. So providing a whole solution for buildings as they go to a smarter, cleaner form of energy.
All right, great. Thanks for the intro, Brad. Good to have you here. All right, so this is going to be a good discussion. I want to start with kind of a general question about the landscape that we're all involved in. So the past several years have been full of blackouts that make headlines, right? We had quite a serious storm here in Texas that displaced a lot of people, killed some people, caused major loss of, let's say, trust in our energy grid here locally. And then there's also other events going on globally. I'm sure Laurent is impacted by what's going on in Eastern Europe when he's working with his clients in Europe right now today. So I'm curious to kind of hear from you guys your perspective on how the discourse around these products has changed over the past couple of years, how consumers are kind of responding to these events that are causing them to maybe be more aware of the need for grid stability and distributed energy. So Brad, since we were just talking, can I start with you, and can you let me know kind of how have things changed in the last year and last couple of years in terms of interest in solar, and kind of what has been your experience?
Yeah, so ever since you mentioned the winter storm here in North Texas, that had a huge impact on everything throughout the territory here. We've had a lot of customers reaching out to us for some sort of backup power, resilience, either through energy storage or through generators, because as you mentioned before, they don't feel safe. They don't feel like they can rely on the grid anymore. We've had rolling blackouts here throughout North Texas, and electricity has become so vital to our everyday way of living. Even being down for 30 minutes, an hour is just not conducive to the way that we live anymore. So all of our customers that have been reaching out to us have been requesting some sort of off-grid solution along with solar, whether it be the batteries, generators, something so that they can rely on themselves and not have to rely on the grid anymore. I think it's only going to become standard across the U.S. as we progress. All the issues that we're seeing across the U.S. as far as energy. I think everyone has kind of gotten to the point where this is just the way of life as it is now, and need to prep for that.
Yeah, that's right. So Keely, you mentioned that you guys had a previous product, and the Timberline Solar solution is your new big one. Well, you guys certainly picked an interesting time to try and come to market with a big splash product in the midst of a supply chain crisis, workforce crisis, and an energy crisis, basically. So could you talk a little bit about how that road has been for you guys over the past couple of years, trying to get Timberline Solar out there on roofs?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it was made all the more interesting. We are an American manufacturer, right? Our first 50 megawatt plant is in San Jose, California. We're going to be building, or actually in the process of building, a 250 megawatt plant north of Austin, Texas. So home for Parks Associates and also home for us. We have a lot of fondness for Texas. We've been able to make it work through one way or another, and a lot of ingenuity on the part of our leadership team. It does help to be part of a massive global industrial company, and we really are in the proof of concept phase with our product. And so we've been able to fulfill on our supply chain needs and to produce the amount of product that we need to produce at this point in time. To the point around disaster resilience, to make a couple comments on that, our product has the same exact ratings, and I said this earlier, as America's best-selling roof, the Timberline roof. Hail rating, wind rating, I think it's up to 150 miles an hour. During Hurricane Ian, our systems that have been installed there in Florida came through unscathed, performed incredibly well. So we really are proud not only of the way we've been able to launch the product, ramp manufacturing, go to market, bring hundreds of roofers into the program this year, but also to actually see the performance in the field. And as more consumers, and both you've got the prosumers looking for clean energy, but then the sort of mainstream everyday folks who are thinking about how to keep the lights on and maybe are less motivated by environment. We have a way to reach those folks as well, and to guarantee them that their roof will continue to perform and to protect their home in the ways that they expect, while also generating clean energy.
Right. That's great. So Laurent, I kind of made some presumptions there. I don't think I've actually asked you what the experience has been like in France. I have a bunch of friends who live in Europe who tell me their kind of personal perspective, but I'm interested to hear how your kind of process has been in terms of dealing with supply chain crisis around EVs, which doesn't help you trying to make charging solutions, but also just the energy climate being so wild in Europe this past year.
Yeah, it is a lot of new things in Europe happening. Really the very high prices and people rethinking their best way of charging, and solar PV self-consumption becoming a very mainstream option. into a lot of markets. So we've seen these markets tripling in the last 3 years. And what we've also experienced is the threat of blackouts, which was not really existing in Europe before. We know that it is existing already in the US, and we see extreme weather events happening more and more on grids. And we've made sure on our side, on our home energy station, that our home energy station is really able to cover both off-grid and on-grid together through the same technology. So basically being able to, on one side, safeguard houses when there is a blackout, but also optimize home energy costs in view of the benefit of solar PV. So that's really the mainstream of our value proposition, and we see a very strong appetite for such integrated products.
So how about you, Brett? I mean, you have a really interesting kind of marketplace too, right? So there was a major boom in renovation in 2021. I'm not sure how necessarily things are going in 2022 as interest rates go up and new building is kind of going down. But there's definitely still need for lots of the training work that you guys do. So could you talk a little bit about how your experience has been across the past couple year or two, trying to get people trained up and ready to make more resilient homes, more energy efficient homes? Muted? Oh yeah, you're muted.
Yeah, so thankfully you mentioned outages. Thankfully, we don't have many winter outages here. It's mostly summer. So that's very helpful. And so that, of course, drives those conversations to some extent. I think most people's mind go directly to the methane gas generators, unfortunately. And then from there, people go, hey, I should get solar to protect against this. And so part of the education is helping people understand ultimately that solar does nothing when the grid goes down. A lot of people don't know that. So part of it is just making people aware of that fact, that it's actually kind of, I joke, kind of a useless piece of junk on your roof when the grid is out, unfortunately. And so educating people about the battery systems or some of the other systems that aren't as expensive that can still allow some critical loads to occur. And so that's been, part of our education sessions here, and just continuing to let people know that there's a really strong Michigan solar user group on Facebook that I'm part of, and many other people are part of, and more people are joining all the time. Our friends at the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association. And then, another part is buy down programs. So trying to make this stuff more affordable. Ann Arbor, Michigan has, I think, one of the a nationally recognized solar group buy program where you get large communities of folks in a neighborhood all buying solar, and then that gets the cost down. And so that is expanding now rapidly across the state, and we're trying to do more education and awareness about those opportunities, which then allows us to get people's attention and talk about the other, batteries and other distributed energy resources.
Right, so we've had a couple of topics come up here that are relevant to what SolarEdge is trying to do. We heard about the prosumers. We've talked about how people are interacting with the grid. Magnus, can you talk a little bit about how the virtual power plant kind of approach and solution fits in, and where SolarEdge fits in terms of so reducing the number of blackouts that are based on consumption, and just generally supporting the growth of solar?
Sure, absolutely. And it's interesting. I did want to make a comment about the about some of these natural events or unnatural events that that push people off of the grid. There's kind of an odd irony in as much as the places where you have an event like that, like Texas or Puerto Rico, Florida, now in California with the PSPS events. People are trying to create, personal resilience for themselves by putting in PV and batteries, but they are also, in a way, seeding the market for resources that the utilities can make use of. The only problem with that, of course, is that the most progressive utilities, in terms of making use of those resources, aren't necessarily the ones that have those seeds planted. So, over time there will be better overlap, but initially they need to sort of be seen as two different events. people who are putting in systems for resiliency versus utilities who are in a position to make use of it. Having said that, there are several utilities that are learning how to make use of the resources that are deployed on their grid. And when you combine PV plus storage, generally you are going to be doing it for backup. But if you can become part of a program that allows the utilities to deploy the storage, then there's a lot of gain to be had. We've worked, for instance, in the past with National Grid. National Grid will contact us and say, generally a day before, that there's going to be some sort of an event that they need to have additional energy for, and they will handsomely compensate the homeowner for the opportunity to access the energy that's in their batteries or on their roof in support of the network. I think the most recent example that we have is we've joined Rocky Mountain Power's WattSmart battery program, which really supports solar plus storage in that region. Because we're part of that partnership, it allows Rocky Mountain Power to take advantage of kind of the fast response that we get by having cloud control of all of our smart inverters on that grid, and to sort of distribute that energy as they need it to support the grid, while providing really nice economic benefits for the homeowner. So those are some of the programs that we are seeing. As I said, one of the things that we are very aware of, though, is that California, with all of its PSPS events, has been driving a need for batteries throughout the network. And
can I see their image bigger?
Utilities come along, then we will see them really make use of it.
Okay, thanks for that explanation. We're going to hear more about VPPs, I think, from Schneider when they're doing their keynote next.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So I also wanted to go to Keely on this, because I was distracted there and unplugged myself, so it's a mess. But I was watching in the insider chat here. There's some discussion going on, Keely, about what's going on with solar, how solar works during blackouts. You want to talk about that, and you can also answer the question talking about working with utilities.
Yeah, sure thing. Small topics. So the first
Real
part
quick,
of that, yeah, real quick, as pithily as possible. So yeah, if you have a grid tied solar system on your roof, whether it's BIPV or rack mounted, during a blackout event, it will not continue to generate power or energy for the home, or you won't have access to the energy that it's generating because of the need for safety. You can't have a live generation site in a grid that is down for the sake of firefighters, first responders, the utility itself. It becomes sort of a wild card factor that is better not to have to manage during a blackout. So if you have solar on your roof and you don't have battery backup and you continue to be grid tied, you're going to be disconnected from that solar, and you will also be in the blackout unless you're able to tap into a battery resource within your home. And then, Brett, I don't know if you want to add anything more to that piece. You and I were going back and forth on that in the insider chat. So I don't know if you have any additional comments there.
No, I think, yeah, it's just worth continuing to remind people of that. And then that really shows, it gets to that conversation of the battery system or some of the other unique critical load systems that exist. So.
Right, and that's the reason why there's solutions like what Decibel's doing, and a lot of other people are working on, kind of integrating storage more fully, deeply with the home, so that people can use it at least during short blackouts. And then someday the dream would be that we can actually tap into the giant batteries in our cars. We can make that happen. Then we can really have some blackout protection. But in the meantime, the hope is that solar helps reduce load, and then we don't have blackouts from peaks and things like that. Natural disasters will still suck, but we'll have to get batteries for that.
Yeah, and to talk about the utility piece too,
yeah, sorry,
Chris,
go ahead.
a couple interesting things, and to tie it to those comments, I think if the goal is resilience and to reduce blackouts and to reduce the stress on the grid and make sure that everybody has the energy that they need when they need it, solar plus batteries at a larger scale can really, are an incredible solution. In September, I live in the Bay Area of California, not currently there now. That's why it's dark where I am. But, we saw the heat wave in September. And the large-scale batteries that existed on the grid were one of the things that prevented the blackouts that we'd seen in previous years, with a surge in air conditioning use and a surge in demand. There were over 3,000 megawatts that I think were dispatched, and California, in its wisdom, saw fit to put policies in place, and the 10s and the 20s, to really incent the large-scale battery implementation, and in 2022, just this year, it came to fruition and came to bear and really helped us keep the lights on. I think, there's sort of that technological solution, but then there's also a rate structure for the grid and for transmission distribution for the utility model, wherein you incent people to use energy at the right time of day. Hawaii just last week announced that they were going to be implementing time of use rates that really favored the peak solar hours, as opposed, because their energy supply is increasingly solar, and so from 5 to 9 p.m. it's 3 times as expensive to use electricity, as opposed to other parts of the day. And that 3 times piece is the really critical piece within that rate model, because you have to make it economically sort of painful. You have to give people enough incentive to shift their behaviors to other times of day, and to really make it meaningful for them to make those changes.
Right. So I think, Laurent, you wanted to talk about the kind of changing in pricing models. And I also want to go to Brad and talk to you about how you kind of help your clients navigate the relationship with the utilities and time of use rates and getting, net metering maybe, and a lot of other topics that, again, we have to cover quickly. But Laurent, you want to talk a little bit about dynamic pricing?
Yeah, maybe 2 things I would like to add is really our focus is to precisely enable reuse of battery from cars in safeguarding home energy systems. So while it is not obvious right now, if we, with our setup, we are working of putting the right equipment for 80 auto transfer switch, and so being able to normally safeguard your home during 2 or 3 days out of the battery of your car. I think Ford, with the F-150, was pretty clear on what they are aiming for in terms of vehicle to grid and vehicle to home. And to your second question, what we see is with the amount of renewable growing very fast into some energy system, there is no way a regulator can cope with this pace without moving to dynamic tariff. And we think dynamic tariff is really the next way forward, where consumer will receive incentive for consuming at certain time or re-exporting their excess stored energy to the grid during peak time. And our equipment has been designed to be able to automatically respond to such price signal and really automate the entire interaction of prosumers with the energy system. So we think this is really the future way forward. We see California having done a few trials in that space, as well as few countries in Europe, and we will soon be ready to automate and simplify consumer life into this environment.
Yeah, so you mentioned a couple of really important features there in terms of ingesting tariff information into the device, and also touching on the idea of bidirectional charging, so we can leverage the cars someday. But Brad, in today's world, and using the technology that you kind of have available to put on roofs and walls inside your client buildings, can you talk a little bit about how you make choices of that, what to kind of deploy, but then also, like, more importantly, how do you help them navigate the relationship with the utility?
Yeah, so a lot of it has to do with where we're at throughout the U.S. I think as you see, kind of what Keely was touching on, as we see the more deployment of renewables, of solar, you're going to see more the changing of when that time of use, or when electricity is needed. In California, you had the big issue with the duck curve, right? Wherever, in the middle of the day, You don't need as much electricity as you do on the edges of the day. If you want to look at what is going to happen across the U.S., I always say look at Hawaii. They're probably the most advanced utility for having the most impact of renewables on their grid. You saw them remove net metering, require batteries. You'll probably start seeing the same thing in California. We're seeing preliminary viewings of that with the NEM3 that they're pushing through. And you'll see that across the U.S. So it really depends on the markets. Here in Texas, luckily, we haven't gotten to that point yet. A lot of times we use a backup generator, but in areas like California, Hawaii, the backup generators don't make as much sense, and we typically deploy batteries in those areas. Until recently, with the development of batteries, really you need some sort of ability to firm and shape the power, which is where you had peaker plants that were basically large generators or natural gas generators. As we move away from that and we move more towards renewables, we'll need batteries to help with that firming and shaping of the power to wherever we come to an ideal situation, wherever we don't have large fluctuations in needs versus production of electricity, and we just have a consistent behavior across the board. So, choosing what is going to work for our customer really depends on the area of the U.S. and what their need is within that facility. So that's how we choose what kind of technology to go with.
Great. Thanks for kind of laying that out for us. I during Brad's conversation there, I noticed an interesting question in the audience here that I want to, I think, direct to Magnus. The consumer behavior that we're seeing today involves like a lot of, let's say, so today the way that it works is that the people who have solar and storage are really early adopters, people who have done their research in advance, or just kind of had someone knock on the door and sold it to them and they just went with it without knowing. It seems like there's kind of two poles there. But the next group is going to be kind of reaching out, coming to you, but they're not necessarily going to be the gadgety people that we talk about a lot in smart home that are interested in controlling everything manually and having, setting scenes and being really interesting. Maybe they're more interested in automation. So I wanted to see from you, talk about how like you guys are developing your solution. And Laurent, I see you nodding. We can go to you about this too, in terms of how you like to develop it. When you're thinking about the user experience, are you thinking more, let's build towards automation for mass market? Or are you thinking we want to make sure that the people who want to piddle with how all their devices are working can do it too? Or is it kind of you have to serve both at this point?
From my point of view, we are focused on the mass market, and that has a lot of implications to it. The initial rollout of batteries going back, let's say, 5 or even more years ago, was, as you said, primarily to enthusiasts, people who wanted to be able to say, hey, I charge my battery with PV, and if I ever lose the grid, then I can keep the lights on indoors and so forth. The typical homeowners at this stage are highly aware of PV and battery, your previous charts notwithstanding, but people who are in the market do find out about them. But their expectations are very different. They are expecting their whole home to be backed up, not because they're very demanding per se, but they literally don't really know the difference between a kilowatt and a kilowatt hour. That's not their wheelhouse. They want to be able to simply continue on with their lives in a more or less normal way. If, for instance, here in California, if you have a PSPS event, they just want to ride through it and not think about it too hard. So what that means is that the technology that's required to make it simple is now coming to the fore. So people should not be having to go and fiddle with their phones in order to get their house to work right. When they do go off grid, things need to occur autonomously. From our point of view, that means that behind the scenes, there's a great deal more intelligence that needs to be put into place, and certain hardware devices are required in order to manage that. So, for instance, if you have a home and you've invested in solar and a battery, and you happen to have a pool and a hot tub and so forth, you want something that's going to say, hey, I'm off grid. My batteries are only halfway full. Let's turn off the pool pump. Let's turn off the heater on the hot tub and dial that back while we ride out this event. The homeowner doesn't need to be aware of it. It just needs to happen. They certainly will have the opportunity to change those decisions that are made on their behalf. So, for instance, you may turn off the air conditioner, and then when the homeowner may say, "Look, it's really hot. I need it on." And they can countermand it. But most of the activity is now autonomous. So that's kind of the vision that we have. We've moved beyond people who are enthusiasts and deep into the mainstream at this stage.
All right. Now, Brad, I saw you commenting in the chat. The chat is awesome, by the way. I kind of want us to have like a Discord channel after this or something. Will you guys be my internet friends after this? Brett, so I wanted to ask you kind of a different question about this too. So I think you have a bunch of this stuff on your house. Is that what the nod was about?
Yeah, well, that was the other part I had forgot to mention. I'm, currently experimenting with these, some of these different technologies and challenges and opportunities. So.
Right. Okay. So you're hoping for the great solution that Magnus was promising is gonna benefit you. But I was also curious. So I see a question from the audience about the impact of government money, and I wanted to go to you first because I think you kind of have a unique perspective. Are you seeing more interest, or so there's a bunch of money going into green energy and infrastructure in general, and I'm curious to know how that's kind of impacting your not just numbers, but like how the conversation goes with the people who are coming to training for you guys.
Yeah, well, and quickly back to Magnus's point. Like sometimes I joke that I feel like I'm a nuclear submarine operator in my own house or some kind of building manager, right? I have to manage all these different components to get my solar and batteries and appliances and smart ventilation, which I was on, I think, a year ago talking about, and air quality to all sync up. And so it's fun for me, but the average person, it's not going to work. So we do got to find a way to get all these things connected. But yeah, as far as, the funding opportunities go, one of our biggest challenges with that right now is a lot of it is at the state level. Not all of it, but some of it's at the state level. Thankfully, the solar and battery rebates exist at the federal level, and they're already codified into existing programs. So that's very helpful. And then some other programs that have recently come out are called 45L. So anyone who's building new homes or multifamily projects can get this by building basically a zero energy ready home or multifamily building that's pretty much prepared and ready to go to add solar and batteries, when whoever the owners and operators or clients are ready to do so. There's going to be a lot more funding to make sure that gets done, and these are more energy efficient buildings. But yeah, ultimately for us, it's trying to make sure that these funds get distributed, especially in our state, and distributed equitably so people can benefit from them.
All right, and Laurent, I want to give you a chance to speak on automation from y'all solution a little bit. And also, since Brett brought up interoperability, I want to ask you that too, in terms of what are your thoughts on working with other devices in the home? Beyond, you're talking about integrating a bunch of devices just kind of as through the core of your solution, but maybe also lighting, maybe also HVAC, et cetera.
Yeah, so on the automation, we fully support what has been said, and we see in our early adopter that they are really looking at moving away from I would say gigs and expecting really the technology to be plug and play. So we have embedded I would say intelligence, AI, self-forecasting and optimization, which allows to really automate the entire consumer experience into the device. So this is going to come soon on the market. And the other element regarding interoperability, we've been focusing a lot for the moment with car OEMs to enable interoperability with vehicle-to-grid cars. And there is a lot happening here, and we're using the DC charging as an option in the home environment because we think it's much easier to do that. And for sure, we'll be very happy to expand towards other layers of interoperability with the home, heat pumps, and others. And we hope the Matter protocol, for instance, is going to really help to harmonize further the DR integration into the home environment. So all that is in our roadmap, and we are ready to launch the product very soon.
That's awesome. I appreciate you also helping for everyone who's playing Parks Associates virtual event bingo that someone did mention Matter. So that's good. We talk about it all the time. It's a big deal. It's coming out. All the products are rolling out right now. Everyone's excited. We'll talk about it at every event, I promise. Also, so Keely, so you guys were just developing a product, so I'm interested in kind of what your approach was in thinking about the challenges of interoperability and thinking about how you guys wanted the consumer experience to be.
Yeah, I think we all have grand aspirations of becoming like the smart home provider, and that we're going to be the channel and the mechanism in. I do, in many ways, think that companies like Span and Schneider are best positioned for that with their smart electrical panels. But you know, we are very much focused on the roof. Like interoperability is sort of downstream for us, and we're very happy to have other people moving that forward at this point in time.
But you had to pick and choose who your partners were, right? So like you mentioned Span and Schneider. You work with them because you think that they're doing best in class stuff. Because you guys are held responsible, right? You put your stuff on the roof, and then they have a bad,
without a doubt.
Yeah. So can you talk about maybe choosing partners and thinking about that?
Yeah. Like we don't need to be the complete ecosystem, right? But selecting the right people to work with, and you know, to have the technology be reliable, be accessible, be as straightforward and simple as possible, as Magnus and Laurent and Brett were talking about. You know, and from a product development standpoint, you know, we from sort of concept to market release, it took us about 3 years with Timberline Solar, which is unheard of within the industrial roofing space. I mean, I think some of our, speaking of partners, got kind of whiplash in the process. And one of the ways we were able to do that is we co-located research and development and manufacturing in San Jose. And it's also one of the primary reasons why we're able to manufacture in the US, because we have those innovation cycles happening rapidly there at our San Jose location. And we also invited, you know, we're located in Silicon Valley, very enamored of design thinking and user-centric design. We invited roofers into the process. You know, we had material scientists from material scientists PhDs from Stanford and Berkeley up on the roof with their roofing harnesses and hard hats on with roofers, you know, 3 generations who've been in the roofing industry forever, learning from each other and talking about, you know, what is this actually going to take for this to be a product that roofers will adopt and be able to install with the same crews. So the combination of R&D and manufacturing being together, and then really inviting the roofers into the process with an eye to the consumer, of course, as well. And we did a lot of research and work on the consumer side. But really for us, the primary focus was making sure that this was a product that could be installed and understood readily by roofers. And so we said, hey, show us how to do that and what's going to work for you.
Yeah, that's great to work downstream that way and make sure that the kind of install experience is working for everyone. So speaking of install experience, Brad, I want to give you the last word because I've kind of had you on the sidelines for a minute. We have like 1 minute left, so you're going to address this very easy topic for us. So someone in the audience asked, is the electrical grid ready for the coming change, right? This is the bajillion-dollar question. When people start hooking all this stuff up, are utilities ready? And since we know that they're not, Laurent says no. How are people kind of in your position who are kind of on the front lines gonna help kind of liaise between the consumers who are expecting to not have this be a nightmare and the utilities that are kind of trying to prepare for this and kind of turn the battleship around a little bit?
So it's not going to be an overnight transition. I think that's the biggest misnomer that you see. You know, everyone pushing in the media that it's going to be overnight. We're going to flip off all, fossil fuels and switch over to renewable energy, and it's not going to happen like that. It's going to be like any other technology. We're slowly, incrementally going to evolve into the technology, and you're seeing utilities do the same thing. They're not overnight turning off every single fossil fuel group or every single fossil fuel production facility that they're using. They're slowly but surely switching over to solar, to wind, and with that, you're seeing the uptake of the batteries because they're needed on site. So it's going to be a evolution, and it's not going to be overnight. So they are preparing for it. They are moving that route. Some of them faster than others, but that's just the way, you typically have it in a free market.
All right, well, we'll come first for the peaker plants, right? And then we'll figure out the rest of it later.
Right.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. It's been such an interesting conversation. We're going to continue talking about these topics with Ansel from Schneider. Is going to come on and have a conversation with our president, Elizabeth Parks. So that's for the audience. I hope the rest of you guys stick around and kind of continue chatting and continue watching. And Actually, Keely, I don't know what time it is for you, so maybe you're allowed to go. But everyone else, I hope you stick around. Thanks so much. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us, Chris.
Take care, all.
Welcome back. What a great session that was. Really interesting and an awesome presentation from Chris, highlighting some of Parks Associates' latest research and some of the real world examples that we're seeing. We're going to continue this conversation with one of the biggest players in energy in the world, Schneider Electric. And I'm so excited to have Ansul Rajaria, Director of Schneider Electric, joining us for the next 30 minutes. He's going to share some of Schneider Electric's vision for the future of energy, and we'll be taking questions throughout. So please add them to the chat box or questions in the Swap Card platform. Our topics today are really understanding what distributed energy is, how home builders are responding, and what their role is in terms of energy management in the future, what a virtual power plant means, and the role of virtual power plants in the future, and then some of what the government influence is having on the market, especially the Inflation Reduction Act. So Ansul, thank you so much for joining us again. It is such an honor to have you on our virtual stage. Let's go ahead and see if you can start off and share a little bit about your role and Schneider Electric's position in the market.
Yeah, absolutely, Elizabeth. Firstly, thank you for having me. The pleasure is really mine. So just a quick introduction about myself. I lead our connected products for our residential segment, and responsible for all the different smart panels, the smart breakers, etc. That we brought to the market. Based in Chicago, so I'm glad I'm indoors because we just had a first snow today. So from a Schneider standpoint, right, I think there are 4 basic trends that we are seeing in the market today, and which is really around sustainability, resilience, efficiency, and personalization. So, the first thing that we believe is that more and more customers, etc., are looking for solutions to become sustainable. We did a survey earlier this year with customers on what they are looking for, and I think sustainability was among the top Ford reasons why they're moving in there. And that's primarily being driven by a lot of the changes around people adding solar batteries. We are hearing about companies moving into EVs, right? A lot of California as a state had said in 2035, no new sales of the IC engines. So a big driver towards sustainability, which is sort of is our overall motto as a company. The other big aspect, which I think the earlier panelist hit on, was resilience, right? So a lot of the places in the US, California, Texas, we have different storms in Florida where there are just power outages happening across. And, with people working from home, I would say the definition of home has changed. And so now people are very conscious about whether they have power, how much power they have, and can they really live the life normally that they used to. So having solutions that support resilience is extremely important. And then efficiency, right? You want to make sure that you have power, but it's cheap, and you are not your utility bill, which is constantly increasing. How do you manage that in an effective way? And you want all three, but you don't want your comfort to be sacrificed. And that's how your personalization comes in. One of my colleagues keeps talking about you don't want to be the facility manager inside your own home. You want to sort of delegate that to your technology, to your solutions where you're investing your money so that your comfort is not impacted by it. So this is how we see the trends evolving in the industry, and which sort of gears where we are moving towards. So where does Schneider see its vision, right? So if you move on to the next slide, this is the solution that we are working towards, which we call the grid to plug solution. It's because we are bringing solutions that, let's say, makes not only the incoming energy efficient coming from the grid, but right up to the plug level in a much more synchronized and orchestrated way. So on the left, you see things which are coming from our partners. SolarEdge was over there. So we have a partnership with SolarEdge, which are helping us integrate the batteries, the inverters, all the different backup resources. Then all these resources can come inside what we call the sort of the brain of the home, which is our smart panel or the energy center. And this can now sort of have control at the breaker level. And then this information and this control gets downstream into actually at the plug level, because you can have certain things you want to control at the plug versus certain things you can control at the circuit level. So we believe that this overall cohesive approach, starting from the grid right up to the plug level, will really enable an energy system which is digital, connected, it's resilient, and more importantly, it makes your home more efficient. And we don't plan to do it all alone, right? And I think that's why we have partners. GF was there. We have SolarEdge, and we really believe in an open system. So that ultimately, based on the consumer's choice, we can really help in orchestrating this energy management for them. So very excited about it. Very excited to share how these things are coming to fruition, and happy to answer any questions, Elizabeth.
Yeah, this is a great graphic and image, and really being able to explain and understand what we're talking about with distributed energy resources, and how energy is being controlled, and ultimately with the utility having that control factor, playing this huge role. So can you dive in a little bit more about how quickly this needs to happen, and what the important role is in the here and now day for the future that's coming? Why does this matter so much right now?
Yeah, it's a great point, right? I mean, right now the whole COP27 just happened. There is just so much talk about how do we drive, if we start with the climate change. And again, homes produce over 20% of the CO2, right? So they're a big contributor. And so for us to really meet some of the targets that we have to have, distributed energy. The biggest challenge, or I would say one of the biggest challenges of having distributed energy is the electrical system, and how it can really integrate all the different resources. When you think about the different costs that goes inside, a big portion is determined by whether your existing electrical system can easily integrate backup resources, and something that gets overlooked very quickly. And so the ability to make your homes from day one or day zero to in a way that you can have all of these systems integrated I think can go a very long way. And so, the goal is that as homes are being built today, the sooner we can make these homes future proof to have all of these distributed resources, the higher likelihood that over time all these resources will be added to it. Otherwise, our traditional ways in which we built our homes and we've had these electrical panels, they were not designed in a way to have these backup resources. So we have a lot of, I would say, way to go. But I think if we start right now, we can really future-proof all the homes that are being built starting today.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of what we're talking about are things that have been being developed really over decades of time, and truly are coming together with different ecosystems being able to be integrated. And all of this looks great on paper, but can you share some real world examples? I know Schneider Electric, you all are have lots of great initiatives. So is there anything you can point to that is real life?
Yeah. It's always fun to have an academic discussion, but we are very excited. We just announced it this month. So this is a bit behind the works, right? So we announced a deal with KB Homes, which is a very strong partner, and they are, I think, the top 10 builders in the US. And the vision that we had together was, how do we build a community that is really able to solve some of the problems that's happening in California? So people are buying, very expensive homes, but guess what? There is those PSPS events happening, the sort of the famous ones, and people are losing power. So how do you build homes that can not only sustain the energy problems, but actually help the grid in making sure that the grid does not get overloaded? So KB Home, Schneider Electric, Sun Power, we sort of came together, and the opportunity was unique because at that time the Department of Energy was working on what they call connected communities and really trying to solve this problem. So we kind of put a proposal together, and we had support from the university UCI as well as the utility SCE. So all five of us, we put this proposal together, and actually in August this year it got finally approved. And so we are super excited. This community will be over 200 homes in the Menifee area of California, and it'll be supported by a community microgrid, but also each individual homes will have battery along with a smart panel solution. So as a homeowner, you don't have to worry about losing power when there is a power shutdown, but more importantly, you can actually make money by selling power back to the grid. And it not only obviously helps you, but it also helps the grid to become more stabilized for the future. So I really believe that these communities hopefully define what future communities might look like, which not only makes the community resilient, but actually helps the utility in solving their energy challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly in California, we're going to see a great need to be able to help the grid and manage all the energy consumption that's going on. That's going to extend further, to different regions as consumers continue to, add energy being powered in their homes. And it does speak to the builder market and the role that they're playing. Builders are a group that Parks Associates has studied and worked with for really decades in understanding how to add technology in the home. We know that the role of infrastructure is so critical, but how serious, clearly KB Homes is got this project and all in some other ways around technology, but do you see this happening with all of the different builder markets, and what do you think their role will end up being as we think about future homes being built?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? I think builders by definition are a little bit more, I would say, risk averse, right? So it takes time for them. I think we see different builders in different stages. Majority, I would say, they're still in very early phases of figuring out how do you actually help providing these solutions. So California builders a little bit ahead because by law every home they build need to have solar in their home. So I think California is sort of, I would say, pushing the builders to pushing them outside their comfort zone. But we feel that as builders, they do some of these what we call pilot projects, test projects, and they see the value that they can bring to the customers, I think that will really help them in becoming more comfortable with these new technologies. Because one thing, the thing with these technologies is that it's a little bit more expensive, right? So a typical home, by adding some of these solutions, the cost is definitely higher. And I think at the end of the day, if you're able to show that value and transfer that value to the homeowners, then it would make financial sense for everyone involved. So it won't happen overnight. I think this ability to understand that value proposition, share it with your homeowners and buyers, I think that will be a long process. But I would say quite a few of the builders, especially even the ones that are what we call the energy efficient builders, they are taking sort of the first step in testing these things out, understanding what works, what does not, and then they would scale from that point onwards. So long way to go, to be honest with you.
Well, and it does speak to a pretty big strategy shift in terms of builders recognizing, adding cost is in the long run going to pay off through the differentiation of the property and really just the future and what's to come. So some of this also gets into this idea of virtual power plants. And this is a big sounding term. Can you, dumb that down for us a little bit? What are we talking about here? And, how are connected devices, what's the role there as it relates to a virtual power plant?
Yeah, it's a confusing term, right? I mean, by definition, power plant, how do you see it being virtual? So, when you think about a power plant is something that's producing electricity and sending it back to your customers, right? It could be a home, etc. But what a virtual power plant is, these are basically assets, energy, I would say storage assets that are distributed across the US. And utilities have the choice to bring these, I would say, assets on so that they can act as an energy source. So imagine that it's 7 p.m. in the evening. Everyone has come home and turned off the lights in the HVAC, etc. The utility does not have the capacity to match that demand. So what they can do is that they can reach out to other assets that are distributed, and these could be battery, these could be some of the water heaters can be considered as assets, and they have the ability to talk to these assets and say, hey, grid is getting overloaded. Can you be one of my power plants and supply that energy to stabilize the grid? So that specific asset can be called a virtual power plant. And a single asset may not have so much capacity, but over time, as you kind of compile all of these assets and you aggregate them over a community or over a zip code, it can really make a significant difference. So I think that is the concept of virtual power plants that a lot of these companies are aspiring to offer.
Okay, great. And I do have a question that's come in from the audience that I think is somewhat related. So let me throw it out here. Schneider announced earlier this year how it's using digital twins for MDU energy management. Can you share how that works, what this means, and what benefits come from that approach?
Sure. And it's repeat, it's the MDU, right? Multi-dwelling unit.
Yeah, for multi-dwelling units. Yep. So smart apartments, it sounds like.
Correct. So, so the idea of a digital twin is basically, how do you create by definition, a digital version of what's there in your apartment, right? Or what your unit is. So, we have a solution called Wiser Energy, which basically what it does is that it acts as your energy monitor for your home. And it can translate all your different appliances that's in your home into a digital app to basically tell you where your energy is being consumed, who are the energy hogs in your home, and how do you actually save energy. So that's the concept of creating a digital twin, so that you know what's happening inside your home. And it's really the electrons that are flowing behind the wall. You're basically giving a sort of projection it on your app format. And really, at the end of the day, the goal is, can we help you save money over time?
Okay, great. So definitely a tool that is helping customers, consumers understand, their energy usage and then ways they might be able to impact that. So thank you for answering that. Let's move on and talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, anytime we're talking about, the government, it can get complicated. So is there a way that you can quickly sum this up in terms of the the impact you see here as it relates to energy management solutions.
Yeah, I mean, it took a village in Schneider to figure out what, all the different languages. But I think overall, the way we simplified it just so that we could understand it is that we divided into two categories. So one is what we call the tax credits, and then the other is rebate, right? So I think that's one way to simplify it. And then under tax credit, the biggest one is around the federal tax credit for solar. So solar tax credit at one point was 30%, right? If you're buying a solar system, you can get 30% tax credit. The idea was to phase that out to 0%. But where this Inflation Reduction Act came in was they extended the tax credit back to 30% for the next 10 years. So imagine if you take a $10,000 or maybe a $20,000 system, you can actually get 6,000 back in tax savings, which probably would have got phased out. So I think that will be one of the biggest drivers when it comes to adding solar or any sort of storage systems for people. So that's one. And then when it comes to rebates, there are different types of rebates that are there. I would say majority of the rebates are around electrification. So, and it depends upon the income, right? So people at different income levels will get different level of rebates. But as an example, I can share that, let's say you're in a certain income grade. If you do decide to electrify with an electric heat pump, in order to do that, you need a panel. So the total rebate that can be allotted per person, again, depends on the income level, can range from $14,000 to $2,000. And what they've done is for each of those different categories, whether it's a heat pump, a panel, a EV charger, they have allocated how much funds can go against it. And so the whole idea is that they want to incentivize people to electrify their home, and basically the government will provide rebates and cover some of the cost, 0 to 100%, depending upon your capacity and your income level.
Yeah, really interesting, and certainly incentives that save money or give money back. Certainly we know can work well as far as impacting the market. So before we move on, I do have another question. I think it's technical, so let me throw this out to you. Is Schneider considering supporting the ANSI SCTE 267 standard for optimum load shaping? Do you know that ANSI
I'll have to get back on
SCTE?
that. Absolutely.
Okay, we'll get back to whoever answered that, asked that question. We'll get back to you on that. Let's take the last few minutes or so that we have to really talk about the Matter initiative. I know that Schneider made some really big announcements. I think one of your senior leaders gave a keynote even at the recent Matter launch. Tell us about why Matter matters, and what role Schneider is playing in this new standards initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as I mentioned at the start today, that if we want to provide that home, which we call a sustainable home, and we can't do it alone, right? We have to do it with different partners. And I think over time, the challenge that has become with this whole smart ecosystem is that every company, has developed their own language, right, by which they connect and talk to their own products. And over time, it becomes more and more difficult if different companies are building their own language. So the whole concept of Matter was to have a single unified language so that smart products can talk to each other and really orchestrate in a way that can deliver better energy and efficient solution. And so again, Schneider is really a strong believer in having that open ecosystem. And so our goal is to Matter certify our products. In fact, we had the first product certified in Europe earlier this month. And over time, our goal is that all our products will be Matter certified. And we hope most of our partners follow that trail with us. So the goal is that if customers have a choice and they want to use products from different manufacturers, they don't have to go through a lot of trouble to figure out why can't they work together. It should be extremely, I would say, user friendly, and in a way that all of that can connect and really help expand the overall value of the ecosystem. So that's why we believe Matter is so important, and it really helps give customers back the choice, but also make sure that the overall solution is more than in some of the individual parts.
Yeah, it's a really interesting challenge to try to solve, and one that's been, I'd say, looked at, over, well, at least over all the close to 40 years that Parks Associates has been looking at the space. And in our research, we're counting about 70 different products or devices across the three different areas: consumer electronics, smart home devices, and connected health. And so if you look at 70 products and the various entities that would be, contributing to build those products, it's a huge number of players that have to really come together on the engineering side and look to solve that. So with that being said, any comments on how quickly things are going to move as it relates to Matter? I think we heard Brad on an earlier session say that, really nothing happens overnight, especially as it's relating maybe to the utility market. But, just any comments on the pace there and how quickly this move to mass market adoption, which in this whole home vision that we might finally be getting to.
Yeah, I think my guess is like every other technology, it'll follow like an S-shaped adoption curve. So I think initially it'll take some time. And after a certain tipping point, when you have a certain number of, I would say, a number of companies there, then other companies have to be on Matter, right? Because if they are not, then as a customer, you will have certain products that talk to each other via Matter and certain do not. And so I think once that tipping point is reached, we will see an accelerated growth towards Matter. So I think it'll take time, to be honest with you, but I'm hoping once that tipping point is reached, we can really see an accelerated growth. And the onus is on companies like us is how do we get to that tipping point fast, right? And I think obviously Schneider cannot do it alone, but if you have a company like Schneider and other such large companies that can take that and really take it seriously, I'm pretty confident that we will have that tipping point pretty soon that we all can be proud about.
Well, there certainly is a lot of momentum behind the Matter initiative and something that Parks Associates is watching closely, especially as it relates to the impact of, forecasting some of the products that we look at. I have another audience question I want to throw in here. So Schneider-owned Energy Sage is a great resource for connecting solar shoppers to installers. Could you talk about that approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. As some of you may know, that Energy Sage is basically a marketplace platform. So what they do is that they help consumers who are interested in solar to figure out, who are the different solar providers and help them really get a quote and at the end of the day, help them select the right solar solution for them. And the Schneider's goal was, we see them as a great platform to drive sustainability, help customers decarbonize their home. And that's the real reason why we acquired Energy Sage. We see them as independent, so they'll be operating right now independently, as mentioned in the press release. And the goal is that they will remain vendor agnostic, right? So we want to make sure that they provide the best solution to the customer, irrespective of what that manufacturer is. And over time, it's about how can Schneider resources help them scale their vision and really reach out to more and more consumers in their electrification journey.
Okay, great. Thanks for taking that question from the audience. So 30 minutes always goes by quickly. I've got my final question for you. In the crystal ball and looking ahead, maybe a year or so, what do you see happening? Maybe you can comment on the Schneider KB DOE project or anything in regards to new partnerships or services that you see coming.
Yeah, I mean, because you mentioned KB project, I hope all communities that are being built in the next couple of years is sort of has a blueprint of KB, right, where people see sustainability and they see energy as part of their equation. To me, that would be a big thing, that if we can drive that. And from a Schneider standpoint, I think it was said pretty well, right, that when we look at homes, how can our solutions really make your life more simple? And so the solutions you will see coming out from us is really help you make your life simple without making it a technology burden for you. So that's what we are trying to aim for.
Okay, well, great, Ansel. It's always wonderful to have you. We very much appreciate your time and contribution to today's session. So thank you for joining us.
No, my pleasure. Thank you.
So we will be right back. We have another session to end our Smart Energy Summit for the year, Investing in the Future, New Areas of Growth. Give us just a minute and we'll be right back. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Kent, Vice President of Research with Parks Associates. I'm very excited to launch into our final session today, where we're focusing on investment in energy and new areas of growth. I think we'll be building a lot on that first great panel and that executive chat that you just heard with Ansel at Schneider Electric and Elizabeth Parks. The reality is there's certainly no shortage of areas to invest in when we think about the smart energy sector, from solar and storage that we talked a lot about today, grid management technologies and services, products that give consumers and utilities more insight, behind the meter into the home, including single family, multifamily, even commercial properties, and making that whole home or whole building monitoring and management possible. Various energy devices and systems like HVAC, thermostats, lighting, and of course, EVs and charging. So a ton of opportunity to get involved in the smart energy ecosystem. Now, if you were able to catch Chris's earlier presentation, you heard a little bit about the funding side and about how new government initiatives, including the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, are putting new funds out into the market to move smart energy solutions forward, such as the $7.5 billion for public charging infrastructure, expanded incentives for EV buyers, extended incentives for home solar buyers, and new incentives for electrifying the home. Also important when we think about business models and revenue opportunities is the FERC 2222 order that changes how distributed energy resources can participate in energy markets. So on this panel, we're going to focus on the best near-term and long-term investment opportunities in the energy market. We'll hear from our panelists about how they view the effectiveness of these government incentives and how new regulations are really shaping the business opportunities. And finally, how these investments that are being made today will impact the consumer, impact utilities, and the larger smart home market. So I'm very excited to introduce our panelists today. I'm going to ask that each of them introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about their organizations and their role at their organizations before we get going. And I'm excited to start with Jim Greenwell, who's the president and CEO of Spotlight 360 IoT Solutions. Hi, Jim. Thanks for joining us today.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Yourself and about Spotlight 360 IoT Solutions. I think we just lost you. Can you hear us, Jim? We heard you just a minute ago when you said thanks for having me, but then looks like we're not able to hear you. Are you unmuted? Unfortunately. Try again. We can see you just fine. We just can't hear you. So Jim, why don't you hang on there for just a second, and we are going to, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the next speaker, and then we'll come back around to you and make sure that we get to hear from you and everything that you're doing there at 360 IoT. So next up, we have Marissa Humman, who's the Chief Technology Officer at Utilidata. Marissa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jennifer. Can you hear me okay?
I sure can.
Great. I really appreciate the invitation to share Utilidata's perspective on where we're going. We spend a lot of time thinking about where those federal dollars, billions of dollars, are going to go in the next 5 years. And I think this slide says it all, at least from our perspective. From a wholesale generation perspective, we've got decades of tax credits and widespread renewable portfolio standards that have really driven down the cost and made those technologies more accessible. And a lot of investment in a transmission system that allows us to move that generation around. I'm sure that we need new transmission capacity in order to accommodate that new wholesale generation. But I think one of the most neglected and most important parts of the grid is the distribution system. Over the last 10 years, we've seen exponential growth in distributed energy resource, and we expect that to continue into the future. And the distribution grid utilities really have been flying blind. The last push with federal funding really got them SCADA controls or SCADA at the substation level, but oftentimes that visibility didn't extend beyond the substation into the low voltage lines, and the advanced metering infrastructure that went in about a decade ago, while it certainly made it easier to remotely read the status of a house in terms of its, whether or not the power was on, it didn't really get integrated into grid operations. And so we see kind of the biggest place for the federal government to be putting investment in is into the distribution grid. And, kind of three main principles of that is first, providing digitization and visibility of that. The second is making sure that that information is transparent and able to be shared with all the right players so we can create fast movement in our economy. And lastly, that we need to pair those sensors with distributed computing. So, Utilidata has spent the last decade building an AI-driven solution for the substation. So we use machine learning in real time to do substation controls. And about 3 or 4 years ago, started moving that technology out to the edge of the grid in order to accommodate, grid operations issues that are, both created and sometimes supported by distributed energy resources. So, the idea that you would pair the measurement sources on the grid with computation and then pair that computation with artificial intelligence and machine learning is kind of where we think the grid is going and where we think the utilities and the federal government will make the biggest bang for their buck. So back to you, Jennifer.
Awesome, Marissa. Thank you so much for that introduction. We'll be back to you a little bit more on that perspective in a bit. Next, we want to hear from Katie Shields, who's the Senior Manager for Innovation and Product Development at Constellation Energy. Katie, can you just tell us a little bit about Constellation and your role there?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. So I'll just start with Constellation. So Constellation is the #1 provider of carbon-free electricity in the United States. We serve about 2 million customers, and are really focused on helping to accelerate the transition to a carbon-free future. So Constellation is a retail energy supplier, and as a retail energy supplier, one of our largest, one of our biggest areas of emphasis is really on, how can we help develop and deliver differentiated products and services that give our customers a reason to choose Constellation for their energy management, their home services, as well as their sustainability needs. So today I lead our innovation and product development team for our residential and small business customers. I'm responsible for developing and delivering new solutions that help our customers achieve some of those goals that you see up here on the slide. So, really focused on that message of energy savings, which we'll talk a little bit more about later today during our discussion, as well as peace of mind. So, how can we give our customers information about how their home is performing? What is its efficiency? It's going to give them, really arm them with information so that they don't have these costly breakdowns at inopportune times. And then last, but certainly not least, our customers' goals around sustainability. So that's a really big focus for us today. In the residential space, it's definitely less mature than it is on the commercial side, but really focused on understanding what's going to resonate with a residential consumer in terms of sustainability, what types of products are they interested in, and how can we as an energy company help to educate our customers on what that need is and why it's important for them to participate in some of these activities and help the environment. So excited to be here today to talk more about opportunities that we see in the space.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie.
Sure.
And next up, we have Mike Ting, who's the Senior Product Manager with Itron. Hi, Mike. Thanks for joining us today. Tell us a little bit about Itron, for those who might not be familiar with Itron, and of course, your role there.
Sure. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can. Yep.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. Mike Ting. I'm from the product management team at Itron. Itron is historically known as an AMI vendor. Who's longest tenured AMI vendor on a global basis. But things have changed a lot since the AMI kind of 1.0 days. Today, we really see ourselves as providing edge sensing and computing and multi-commodity networks, and then a very wide breadth of outcomes. I think in this day and age, with high levels of DER penetration and some of the distribution grid management issues that folks talk about today, the important thing to understand about Itron is in a couple different pieces. Number one is that pretty much every layer of our portfolio, we very much want a third-party ecosystem type of model, right? So including at the device level in terms of sensors that can be attached to our multi-commodity network. Today, that largely exists in the smart city space. Third-party sensors around anything from air pollution to traffic monitoring, gunshot detection, et cetera. But it's also at the data and compute layer that can happen in terms of pure back office type of third-party application development, but also for our smart meters. We were first to market with a true distributed intelligence smart meter with the processing at the edge, and so you can download apps onto the meters and do all types of cool thing with that high resolution data. But trying to promote third-party engagement in that platform because there are a lot of rich data, even in the AMI 1.0 world, that kind of gets left on the table because of things like network bandwidth constraints and things like that. But that situation is changing, and there's a lot of value to, particularly in the DER management space, that can be derived from accessing that data. So our approach is to really try to open that up to as many third parties as possible.
Awesome. Very excited to hear a little bit more about that in a few minutes, Mike. Okay, next up, we have Doug Hausman. Doug's a management consultant with 1898 and Company, which is part of Burns & McDonnell. So Doug, tell us a little bit about 1898 and your role there.
All of us are focused on the energy transition. And because we're focused on the energy transition, and we are largely engineers who understand how to work on the infrastructure, we're looking at some of the tough problems that are coming up and some of the opportunities and a lot of the gaps in the market. And with that, we're looking at what happens if we disaggregate tariffs and what do we need to be able to support separate tariffs for EVs and HVAC and other things like that, as well as we're looking at how do we get interoperability between the more than 100 protocols that are out there for residential customers for their devices to communicate, and what is a simple, cheap control system for a premise need to be able to do in order for customers to be able to be comfortable putting it in and making it operate.
Fantastic, Doug. Thanks so much for joining us today. I think your camera might be off. We could hear you just fine, but just wanted to let you know if you're able to turn your camera on. We'd love to see you too. But thanks so much for joining us, and looking forward to hearing all of your insights today as well.
Well, I've got a bandwidth issue, so I may not be able to put the camera on.
Okay, well, we welcome your audio participation because we are hearing you very clearly. So thank you. All right, and next we're going to come back to Jim. Jim is with us. There we go. There's Jim Greenwell, Spotlight 360 IoT Solutions. Tell us a little bit about your organization, Jim.
Yeah, can you hear me okay now?
I can, thanks.
Great, thanks for having me. Spotlight IoT Solutions is all about tracing, tracking, transparency of the supply chain. So we see ourselves kind of at the intersection of the consumer and the commercial world. We use sensors and leverage IoT to capture data of assets across the supply chain. We have had a lot of recent success in agriculture, in cannabis, this whole seed to sale concept. And in tracking all this data, it's all about proof of origin, chain of custody, authenticity, proof of sustainability and ESG claims, proof of carbon footprint data. And so we want to have sensors across the supply chain to track location and status of all these assets, particularly assets and supply chains where people are going to consume things or use things like that. So we see power consumption as a big part of this. Greenhouses 4 times a year, so every season is driving enormous amounts of energy, and we like to think of energy like the Colorado River, where everybody downstream has to work with everybody upstream to find ways to conserve. So you heard future or past panelists here today talk about power outages. Well, a lot of these states that are coming online with indoor agriculture like cannabis, like Bitcoin mining, they're all consuming enormous amounts of energy, and they have to work together with residential to find ways to conserve all that. So I'll save some of my comments around that for when we're in the panel, but we're excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great, thanks so much for being here. And really, I was going to ask each of you to tell us a little bit about where you're focusing on investing in products and services in the energy market. And you guys did a great job of doing that right in your introductions. But I'm going to ask a little bit more detail for each of you. Jim, I'll start with you since you were just wrapping up there, and then go to Mike. Jim, one thing that you mentioned about something that you're focused on, I think is really interesting and kind of a relatively new topic, which is the proof of sustainability claims. You know, you hear about greenwashing and organizations who, you know, say they're green, but what does that really mean? And how you can provide, you know, the data that might be necessary. We're starting to hear a little bit more about demand for the ability to prove, right? You know, how do you measure your impact on the carbon footprint? How do you measure energy savings and your overall energy impact? And it sounds like you are working a little bit on this proof of sustainability, you know, claims. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, and why you think that is an area that's, you know, of growing interest for you?
Yeah, thank you. I'll let some of the other panelists weigh in on this, but we think it's all about data, and you have to capture the data in order to provide this kind of proof. And the data is across the supply chain. There's an ecosystem of partners that will work together. And so a lot of that in the ecosystem is considered capital expenditure. You have to buy HVAC units to cool down an indoor grow when you're using lights to simulate Mother Nature. Well, we kind of shift that paradigm to look at maybe it's environment as a service, so that you don't have this CapEx, and maybe you can push more of that to OpEx and manage it on a subscription basis, drive these costs out so that you can use your money to capture data. So imagine a world where the consumer can access the same data as the ecosystem is capturing. So if the product or consumer goods have a QR code, you could scan the QR code on a package and literally Google backwards in the supply chain to see this data and have proof of sustainability. So if you make a claim, prove the claim. Well, I can prove the claim because I can expose to the consumer this data that's been captured over time, over the supply chain. It can use artificial intelligence, it can use blockchain, a lot of other technologies can come into play there. And if you have nothing to hide, then prove it. And so that's what we come back to, this tracing, tracking, transparency.
Yep. Now, Mike, I'll come to you, and then Marissa, you guys are both very much involved in the data side and connecting different parts of the ecosystem. Mike, I don't know if you have comments on that in particular, but I was also interested in your point about how, you know, a lot of AMI and meter data might be actually underutilized right now, and how interested you are in connecting to different types of data types and sensor types. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that too.
Yeah, I mean, I would say similar things to Jim, but in a kind of grid-facing point of view, right? And so a lot of what we're trying to do is obviously, you know, we talked about how we're trying to open our platforms to third-party developers, right? Because we're sitting on mass quantities of just truly big data, right? But the intent behind that is ultimately to make grid operations and grid CapEx as efficient as possible, and also to make markets as efficient as possible. So an example of this is in New York, in the New York REV proceeding. You know, the policy objective there is to provide the larger market. So this could be an energy efficiency or demand response, more efficient by providing more, to expose more data to make things like customer discovery cheaper and better for the entire market, to make things like market settlement more efficient and accurate, and that feeds back into the way that those you know, DERs are valued, and you know, that becomes that synergistic cycle, right, between more accurate data leads to more accurate valuation, means to, you know, those resources being trusted and from a, you know, grid operations and grid planning point of view. And that's, you know, ultimately we want to enable those types of outcomes, right? So obviously Itron is a vendor in that larger ecosystem, but it is, those outcomes are more at the societal level, right?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Now, Marissa, from your point of view, I don't know if you want to chime in on this here, or even just how the distribution part, right, of the end-to-end grid that you were showing kind of plays in tying some of these data streams together too.
Yeah, I think probably the first thing to remember is that when we first started designing distribution systems, we didn't have information, right? We didn't know, we had like broad levels of prediction about like what the peak demand for the whole feeder was going to be. And because of that kind of history of how we design distribution systems, we design for that worst case scenario. And we see that now in the lengthy, solar interconnection queues. And I think we'll pretty soon see that in lengthy EV charging interconnection queues, that the lack of visibility really increases the price for everybody. And so it starts with visibility. And I think Mike hit that one right on the head, that there's a lot of information at the source of the measurement that is thrown out because of the bandwidth constraints of the system. And so moving computation that allows you to turn that kind of raw data into an event or information that's more compact, smaller to send back over a network is really important. But I think then the next thing is that we do need to be able to use it. And I think the backend systems of the utility do need some investment and some love and attention, so that those new sources of information can be utilized. We're big proponents of open structure between software systems, so that you don't have to have one closed proprietary network in order to make use of that. And then the last thing is, and I think Mike, you touched on this as well in your introduction, that if you've got the visibility and you've got some good data processing skills, you can now influence what's going on. And that last piece, being able to influence what's going on, also drives down the cost considerably. And I'll give the quick use case of, so my neighbors, there's 4 of us, all connected to the same transformer. I have an EV, and when I plug that in, we use about 2/3 of that transformer's capacity. And luckily, my other 3 neighbors don't have an EV yet. But when they get one, if we don't coordinate, then we have to upgrade that transformer, and that's expensive, and it's got a long wait time right now. So visibility, being able to understand how to integrate that information into backend systems, and then being able to influence what's going on at those endpoints is going to really drive down the cost of us making this big transition to an electrified and decarbonized future.
Fantastic. Now, Doug, I want to switch to you in just a moment about kind of the funding and the incentives that are coming down the pipe. But Katie, I thought first it'd be nice to hear, since you have a touch point right to the end user as a retail energy provider, and you showed us actually in your introductory slide these like sliding slide cool things. Do you care more about this or that or the other thing? What we're talking about data here. What type of information do you think consumers want to see, and what's valuable for them to see and know?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, so I think for us, like you said, right, on the slide we showed these 3 different sliders, right, about what the customer's goals are. And so when we think about their areas of focus in the energy space, right, it is from that perspective of the consumer, and what jobs are they looking to Constellation to help solve for them. So to answer your question specifically about the information that they want to hear from us, I think one really big area that we're focused is around helping customers understand the efficiency of their home. So how can we use data to help inform and educate our customers on how their home is performing? What data can we deliver to them that's going to help them identify if there's inefficient usage with a specific device, really with that end goal of delivering one, peace of mind, knowing that things aren't going to break down at inconvenient times, and 2, that energy savings goal. So knowing that their appliances and HVAC are all operating as efficiently as possible, so that they are, really managing their energy usage and maximizing that energy savings opportunity. And in the event that they aren't operating optimally. We have a home service organization that will come out and visit the customer's home and perform maintenance or upgrades as needed.
Yeah, it's, I think tying that information to action, not just like here's what's going on, but what it means and what can be done after that, that I feel like so many other energy providers perhaps haven't gotten to yet, right? It's like it's one thing to see once a week or once a month on your bill information about maybe how you compare to a different household, but that's like a little snippet, and people are getting trained to see more and more actionable data from the other kind of smart areas of their lives. And now, so Doug, I did want to pull you in here and really talk a little bit more about kind of the incentives that we're seeing in the different government initiatives, and also maybe the impact of FERC 2222 to almost different, big different topics or impacts. But in your work and with your clients, how are you seeing this impact where people are investing today, and where the biggest growth opportunities are in smart energy markets?
So if you want to see where we're investing these days, all you have to do is go out to Energy Impact Partners, which we're a member of, and take a look at our portfolio there. As far as money in the IRA, of course, there's a little north of $7 trillion for investment in production tax credits for solar and associated other generation and storage opportunities. That's an uncapped piece of the bill that wasn't priced in. And then there's $19 for every dollar of infrastructure in demand creation for the generation and storage that $7 trillion will provide. So it's going to be interesting on how we get that $7 trillion worth of generation to that demand, given the small amount of investment in infrastructure and no changes in regulatory and permitting for that infrastructure. And a big part of making that infrastructure continue to work will be something like disaggregation of the different loads in the house at a level that the regulatory commissions will accept, which probably means that all the meters that are in the field today are obsolete. And the way we think about metering today is likely obsolete. And the communications networks that we currently use for utilities are also likely obsolete, because we can't just calculate in the meter in order to be able to support FERC 2222. We're going to have that data in individual data pieces in order to support proof of performance. And of course, the fun thing in FERC 2222 is energy efficiency, because we're not going to be able to meter that. And if I were going to make an investment right now, even though it's highly controversial and many people are trying to delay the implementation of that, I'd build an energy efficiency aggregator, because then I could bid that energy efficiency in at zero every hour of the day and get paid probably pretty much every hour of the day or night. And I'd have literally no cost to operate that energy efficiency, because once I put a new refrigerator in that uses half the amount of electricity, I'm done. If I put insulation in the house, I've got a 30-year bid that I can do. And that's going to be fun for the utilities to keep track of that energy efficiency, especially when you switch from natural gas to electricity and now claim efficiency, even though you've added to the electrical load. So we're going to have some fun games going forward out of the IRA, the IIJA, and FERC 2222, and how they intersect. And one of the big things that everybody needs to remember is neighborhoods that weren't going to get energy efficiency previously because of the way the IRA is structured are now going to be number one with a bullet on getting that energy efficiency. So you're now looking at the fourth quartile neighborhoods likely getting far more energy efficiency than the first quartile neighborhoods when it comes to demographic. So we're going to have a lot of fun over the next few years.
Yeah, Doug, I'd love to come back to you in just a minute about that last point you made, which I think is a really important one of almost flipping who benefits. I think is a really great point to come back to, but there's a lot to unpack here. So I maybe thought I might go to Mike if you had any response on the idea that all the meters out there, does FERC 2222 make all of the meters out there obsolete, or what's Itron's, what's the impact of FERC 2222 on Itron's plan?
First, I got to unmute myself. I mean, obviously, as the lone AMI vendor on the panel, I'm obligated to try to push back a little bit on that assessment. The specific to FERC 2222, you're talking about essentially measurement of DER performance, right? Measurement and validation of DER performance for markets. That is specifically one of the capabilities of our distributed intelligence meters, right? The idea is to, and not just our meters, but most new meters sample in the kilohertz range. That's very, very high resolution. We can do analytics on that high frequency data at the meter. Third parties can write applications to leverage that metrology at the edge. And so, I mean, that really is very well positioned to enable the use case of measuring DER performance and settling in markets with very high frequency. So that's, our being able to do distributed computing at the edge, at the meter is, we feel, a key enabler in this larger ecosystem to make, either wholesale or distribution level markets for DER services real.
Okay. All right, thanks, Mike. Marissa, how about you? What's your take on the impact of FERC 2222?
This will be quick, and I don't like going toe-to-toe with Doug because he can always talk his way around me, but I'll try. I want to challenge the notion that we're going to have device-level participation classes and that we're going to, pay separately to the same, individual for their HVAC and their EV and their storage device. I think that you could imagine a world in which the customer, the whole premise is that virtual power plant. It is metered as a whole thing, and that whole thing then participates as an entity in the various energy markets. So just a different perspective on how to get to a future that provides lots of low cost flexibility, but maybe with a simpler way to get at the economics of it.
Okay, great. And then I think Jim wanted to comment too, and then maybe we can get back to the other point about the impact of some of these new initiatives, and we can stay on for 22 if we want, but how the investments that we're making today really are going to impact the consumer, I think is great. Jim, but did you want to weigh in on this part of the conversation?
Yeah, so our viewpoint is we take what you're talking about right now and push it to the commercial side. And Katie makes a good point about if inefficiency in a particular device or appliance with connectivity, we can send alerts. And so Park and Associates talks about this connected consumer, and we expand that vision to the connected commercial environment. So it could be the refrigerator break room at your office, or it could be your factory or your warehouse, or it could be your kitchen, and all these things are part of the ecosystem that contribute to the load and the demand and the power outages. And so with the devices and connectivity and alerts, all of this could become real time, and consumer behavior is being changed to, I want to know all this data real time.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think that's That's spot on. We are kind of setting consumer expectations about what they can and should have access to in all sorts of areas. And we see this in Park Associates research, even let's say with health, right? That there are applications that I can see more and more about my own data, and I should see doctor's notes now. And we know more about our screen time usage than we probably even want to know, right? But I'd love to have Doug, could you unpack a little bit your point about how some of the incentives, right, that are now on market are also making for more investment in the homes that may have been left out of, or not traditionally, right, the kind of first takers of whether it be solar or storage or other, smart thermostats or other types of kind of home energy management products.
So if you look carefully at the verbiage in the IRA, a good sized chunk of the money is reserved for disadvantaged communities to provide appliances to those communities, and the city government or the utility or third parties that are qualified can apply for a grant and go swap appliances or provide insulation or other things in those traditionally disadvantaged neighborhoods or low-income neighborhoods. So you're seeing in places like Baltimore, plans being made not only to upgrade the grid to allow in communities where they don't allow solar or EVs now, the grid to be expanded to be able to support that. And you're seeing the city government then coming along in those same communities and looking at removing all the natural gas appliances, putting solar on the roof, providing insulation and other things in the dwelling in order to bring those up to become some of the most efficient homes in the community. And then you start to look at schools and things like that, where many of them are horribly energy inefficient. And you're probably going to see cities that have school districts actually apply some of the things that are needed in order to make those schools a lot smarter and a lot more inefficient as well. So we're going to see some flip on where we need to pay attention as the IIJA proposals come in for reliability, resiliency, and low-income community improvement, and then see a lot of those paired with IRA grant requests in order to then further it to the buildings that are in those neighborhoods. And I think we'll see 7 out of the 8 resiliency proposals that are accepted likely be those kinds of communities where something between $200 and $500 million is devoted to each of those communities to completely flip the energy infrastructure.
Thanks for unpacking that, Doug. I'd love to maybe get Katie's take on the different consumer segments that you serve, right? You have different types of households that you're reaching. Can you share with us anything about the types of the different customer segments and maybe who's most engaged with your energy programs today and how you're trying to reach underserved populations?
Yeah, sure. So, I think what we're really excited about when we think about some of these future growth areas is that there is, there's this, I guess really overlap when we think about things like EV and solar and smart home technology. And so, from our perspective, we're not, we're not necessarily looking at any of these areas as a standalone solution, right? The real opportunity and excitement comes from when these services and products are working in coordination with each other. And so, as a segment, right, we've learned, and some of this, Parks, you helped us learn through the research that you did. EV owners are willing. They are kind of at the top of the list in terms of consumers who are willing to invest time and money to reduce energy consumption. They're also 2 to 5 times more likely to be willing to pay for renewable energy. They're twice as likely to own a smart home device. They're 4 times as likely to own solar equipment. So this for us is where we, that's a consumer segment that we think there's a huge opportunity, right? These consumers who are green, they're concerned about their energy consumption, and they're really interested in using technology in their life to achieve some of these goals. So from that consumer segment perspective, right, that's an area where we see a huge opportunity, and really want to focus on some of these growth opportunities.
Yep. Makes sense. Our data does show that exactly right. A lot of overlap between those investing kind of in smart home or interested in smart home, EVs, even home security, right? A lot of homeowners, households with kids, in particular, very, very strong consumer segments. Marissa, I think you wanted to jump in here on some of your experience with energy policy in Colorado and reaching different customer segments.
Yeah, I think so. I had the opportunity to spend some time with the policy group in Colorado, who was really trying to make sure that we were prepared. This was a couple of years ago. Make sure we were prepared for those federal funds. And so diving into the requirements for Justice 40. One thing that I think we should acknowledge is that while we are all on the grid side, on the electricity side, the communities that we're trying to reach have bigger problems, of which electricity and decarbonization or electrification is like a pretty small subset of that issue. And so engaging with community groups that represent those populations and gathering their feedback on what they actually need in order to improve the quality of life, especially around their exposure to pollution, their access to low cost, reliable transportation, hopefully clean also, and then in terms of improving their housing environment so that it is safer, warmer, and more cost effective. I think all of those things need to be incorporated into how we view implementation of these large federal funding opportunities into really making a lasting impact on the communities.
So thank you for sharing that. One last kind of piece on kind of consumer sentiment that I thought would be interesting to pull in here. Jim, I know you've made a point to me when we were kind of prepping for this panel about how consumer attitudes and preferences are changing and how that actually is impacting behaviors in the workplace and how they're bringing some of those values, especially since you serve the commercial side too, right? People aren't just people in their homes and at their workplace, right? They, are bringing those values with them. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing there?
Yeah, I don't look at these as separate silos. These are all connected, and the consumer behavior starts to expect these things, right? So if you can talk to your camera at home and it's Ring, you can talk to it at the office when a package is delivered after hours or in the evening. And so I think the consumer behavior just starts to expect this, that wherever I am, I'm connected. I can get alerts about many different things, the air quality, the humidity, the temperature, all these location elements, GPS is everywhere. And so, we don't freak out that it's turning into this big surveillance state, but the fact is that's all data that allows us to operate better, to live our life better, to make sure we know where our kids are and where our assets are in the company, and that things are happening according to whatever that plan is for whatever it is you're working on. So I think consumers are getting smarter, and Park and Associates always talks about the smart home and the connected home, but I just look at this as one big ecosystem of wherever you are, you're always connected. You can talk, through your car. Speech recognition has become a much better user interface to the computer. So I can drive and talk instead of drive and type. And that applies to a forklift driver, as much as a consumer on the road. So all these user interfaces, all these silos will become one big ecosystem. and we're going to be massive consumers of this data for us to make purchasing decisions and daily decisions about our business and our families and so on. So I'm excited by it. I know some people are not, because it's a little bit of data overload. But at the end of the day, we're all better consumers. We're better community members. All those things, I think, are a win.
So, and it's all about who owns the data, who manages it, privacy, security, controls around that data, of course. Now we have about 10 minutes left, and we do have some questions in from the audience. So I wanted to make sure that we got to get to those. Marissa, there's a question specifically for you. You gave that example of your transformer and how you're using 2/3 of the capacity. The question for you was, without educated customers, how would your utility know your transformer would need to be upgraded? So essentially, are they able to see to that level and have the information they need today to upgrade your equipment?
Yeah, to Mike's point, that information is available on the meter. It's a matter of extracting that information out of the meter and getting it to the right system inside of the utility. So it's totally possible, but we do need to make the investment in that technology and make the commitment to bringing that information back into the right systems at the utility level.
Okay, great.
I could
go ahead, Mike. Yeah.
I can piggyback that. That virtual transformer metering is in a very specific use case that Itron is developing solutions for right now. We have one of the applications that we've designed to run on these distributed intelligence meters actually maps the electrical connective phase and transformer connectivity in real time. The truth is, you can do virtual transformer monitoring based off a GIS map that most utilities maintain for their topology, but they're chronically inaccurate and difficult to maintain using the old traditional methods. But the things like distributed intelligence and edge computing allow you to maintain accurate grid topology in real time, which accounts for outage restoration and switching and everything else that happens in grid ops on a daily basis, right? But as Marissa said, that the data and the technology exists today. It's really a matter of, in my view, the transportation electrification has kind of forced the need, or elevated the need in the purview of utilities to actually establish that visibility on a regular basis. Because before, we didn't have chunky sources of new load, particularly in the residential segment, at the end of a 50 kVA transformer. That just most of the load growth was higher up in the topology, or in new service drops for communities or large C&I businesses or whatever. So it's an issue that can be solved. That visibility can be solved. Actually, I think it's just the growth of residential EV charging has elevated the issue and the need, right? Mm-hmm. So the technology exists.
Awesome. Well, Mike, I might come back to you with this question too. As we kind of step back out and take a bigger picture look again of kind of the growth of smart energy technology and services, can you give any perspective at all about kind of where the U.S. is versus other markets that you, if you guys, play in or that contribute to? Mm-hmm.
Sure. Well, in terms of like the drivers of.
Yeah, that's great.
So I own our DER management solution, so I have a very kind of DER centric perspective on the world. The main differences I think that I see compared to North American markets, one has to do with deregulated markets. So I guess Texas is a deregulated market, but Europe, Australia specifically deregulated. That makes the solution stack different. Value propositions different. But in terms of drivers within the DER space at a high level, adoption of EVs is one of the main drivers in North America, right now in terms of both pain points and load growth and all that stuff. In Australia, it's really all about managing solar. They have the highest penetration of rooftop solar in the world, over 30% and growing. Their interconnection queue is miles long, and they have severe duck curve at a aggregate national level. And so a lot of these solutions and pain points in Australia are very solar driven, solar management driven, as opposed to North America. That's, it's more kind of EV centric. In Europe, it's interesting because a lot of the drivers are not necessarily from a technology adoption side on the consumer side, but from a regulatory perspective. There's in France, for example, decarbonization at the city level is a thing with teeth, and that is not the case in most other geographies. And so that at the city level, there's kind of a smart city canopy under it, but it's really kind of like a quasi microgrid, right? There are cities that have decarbonization objectives and authority to meet them aggressively. And so that's at the highest level. That's kind of the thumbnail version of what I see in terms of the difference in the drivers in the DER space.
Yeah, no, that was great. Lots of insight. Thank you for answering that question. I think Marissa wanted to chime in here too.
Sure. Two comments on Europe. One, I do see a trend in Europe toward using open source software for even down to grid operations. So the Linux Foundation Energy, LFE, has I think about 20 different projects now running in Europe where they're running open source software for everything from substation operations to grid planning. So that's one trend that I don't see in the US. And then the other one is some modularity or separability of technology. So in the Netherlands, they have their next generation metering plan is to create the meter as a separable box from what they call the gateway, which is where the distributed intelligence and the network are located. And they did that for two reasons. One, they wanted to make sure that they could get kind of the best in breed of the meter and best in breed of gateway. And two, they see that gateway as something that needs to turn over faster than the metrology does, right? The metrology tech can sit there for 20 or 30 years, very, very without degradation. But how often do you replace your iPhone or your computer? More on the 3 to 5 year time scale. And so I think that's another approach that we should maybe consider in the US, is bringing that back in as a way of meeting our future needs.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's going to have to be the last word because we're right at time now. Thank you all so much. This was really a heavy hitter panel. You all brought a ton of insight in just an hour. Thank you all so much for your participation, and we hope to see you at another Smart Energy event.
Thank you.
Thank you. And let me tell you when that next Smart Energy event is going to be here. We're going to pull up the date. So this is our last virtual session for Smart Energy Summit. This is just a reminder here. We do, of course, do an annual study primary study of consumers. This one, Smart Energy at Home, Renewable, Responsive, Resilient, is available today, telling you all about where consumers are at and how they understand these topics and what they're looking for when it comes to solar and EVs and smart thermostats and energy management in their homes. So please reach out if you're interested in some of that research we talked about today. We are back in person and so excited to be back in person in Austin in February. So please, I believe our call for speakers is open. And so if you're interested in speaking at Smart Energy Summit, please reach out and let us know. You can do that on our website or directly to any of us at Parks. And we will have several virtual sessions throughout the year as well next year. So please come back and check out the agenda for that. Of course, we welcome you to attend any of our events. All of our events are Connection Summit is a one-day full connected home ecosystem view that's partnered and co-located at CES. So I believe We are wrapping up our speakers there as well. So we might have one more slot if you're interested in speaking at Connection Summit, but we certainly welcome you to attend. And we have a big Parks Associates reception at CES. So if you're in the connected home space and you're at CES, we certainly would want to see you there. Please reach out if you're interested in that reception. As well as today, actually, we have our inaugural session for our new Smart Spaces event. So we are covering not just single family residential home. There is so much opportunity, so much happening in multifamily, hospitality, senior living communities, and it's a really interesting, different kind of value proposition. So about, I think, in a half hour, we have our full afternoon session, first virtual session on smart spaces. So if you've registered for both, you're actually going to go back to the Swap Card homepage and then click into the Smart Spaces event to get there. Certainly still time to register if you want to join us for this afternoon as well. And then we'll be in person in April with our Smart Spaces event. So very excited about that. Okay, so if you're interested in any custom marketing services, white papers, webinars, podcasts, these are all based in our research and partnering with your team to educate the market and about what's happening in these great connected technology spaces. So please reach out to Ashton Gambrell if you're interested in sponsoring any of those. If you're interested in research, reach out to Jason Paris, and of course, Mindy Sue, the great leader of our events here at Parks Associates and Marketing. Reach out to her if you're interested in speaking. Thank you very much. Great year with Smart Energy, and I've appreciated all the learning from all of the industry speakers who spoke with us this year. So thank you for your participation, and thank you for attending.